Big Ben, the Eiffel Tower, the Statue of Liberty, Christ the Redeemer. Every city has its iconic cultural landmarks, places that come to mind when the city comes up in conversation. Vancouver is no exception. For example, we've got the Lionsgate Bridge, Science World, Sailor Hager's Brew Pub. But in 2010, in anticipation of the Olympic Winter Games, a new star was born.
There's a new kind of magic in the air. It's the wind of change. Here at the peak of Vancouver, a quiet revolution has begun in the form of a graceful, perfectly proportioned white wand perched 200 feet above the summit of Grouse Mountain. Welcome to the Eye of the Wind.
Yes, Grouse Mountain built a wind turbine, the first in the world of its kind, one that has a viewing platform attached to its structure. And since then, it has become a popular tourist attraction, as well as being visible from all of Vancouver. It's quite iconic. But in the 15 years since it was built, people have noticed something.
I wish it was spinning though.
The design is very human, but have you ever seen it turning?
So what's happening here? Well, I think to get to the bottom of this, let's go to the top of Grouse. I didn't feel like spending $80 today, so here we are, hiking up. Boy, am I out of shape. So if you were wondering why the turbine blades don't spin, well, the reasons are pretty straightforward. When in motion, the blades of the turbine create this kind of uncomfortable vibration in the viewing platform. And so Grouse Mountain keeps the blades in visitor mode, or feathered, so that they don't spin during the tourist season, because the platform is just a bit uncomfortable otherwise.
One of the things in the wintertime, if you don't see it moving, it could be the case that there's ice on it, and certainly because there's a ski run right there.
In the wintertime, due to its location on top of a ski hill, the blades remain locked down all the time. This is because, unforeseen during the development of the turbine, ice would form on the blades and would sling off during rotation. Now this is obviously extremely dangerous, so they can't have it rotating whenever there are skiers on the mountain. The wind is often not fast enough on grouse for the blades to spin. See, the eye of the wind has a cut-in point of 9.7 kilometers per hour, and if you look at the average wind speeds the mountain gets, even if the turbine was unlocked 24/7, there probably wouldn't be enough wind to spin it most of the time. So there, that's it. If that's all you wanted to know, then, feel free to head out, but I suggest you stick around, because the further that I dug into this story, the more interesting it got. The Eye of the Wind has a controversial past. In fact, in 2008, during the planning and permitting process, it felt a little bit like we were building a Hollywood sign. The turbine was originally proposed by Grouse Mountain as a way to offset some of its carbon footprint, and you can see this in the original development application from 2008. The magic number being how the windmill would offset 25% of the mountain's energy needs on the way to the mountain's goal of being energy self-sufficient and carbon neutral. These claims were instrumental in getting the project approved by the District of North Vancouver. As shown here, in the original October 2008 council meeting in which the Eye of the Wind was approved, a report was presented to the council which showed the following. Staff at the District of North Vancouver assessed the proposal and, based on what they had been told by Grouse, recommended that the council issue a permit.
Grouse Mountain is proposing to construct a wind turbine on the top of Peak Mountain to offset 20% of their hydro needs. The turbine has a capacity of 1.5 megawatts, which is anticipated to generate 20 to 25% of Grouse Mountain's electrical requirements, or the equivalent of the power used by 400 homes. This equates to an annual reduction of 1,600 tons of carbon. There was a public input period, including a meeting in which people were able to ask questions about the project, and everybody clapped. The report concluded that Grouse was proposing an innovative wind turbine that will have potential to significantly reduce their energy consumption, but would also be a symbol of sustainability efforts, serving to remind and educate our community about alternative energy. Stuart McLaughlin, the president of Grouse Mountain at the time, spoke to council in support of the project, and he said this: "This project is a unique way for the district to make a difference,
and that they are also running out of time to approve it in order for it to be ready for the 2010 Olympic Games. And so the turbine was approved in a 4-3 split council vote, with Mayor Walton providing the tiebreak. The votes against were primarily to do with spoiling the skyline and noise, which, for a turbine that makes 54 decibels of noise kilometers away from the nearest house, I mean, come on, what are we doing here? Public opinion on the turbine project was overwhelmingly positive. Most people were quite optimistic about wind energy, and they thought that this was a cool beacon of hope for the future. However, there were critics. When you think of wind power, the first drawback that normally comes to mind is the birds and the bees, the birds and the bats. And you'll find out that a lot of the time, birds and bats are attracted to the spinning blades of the turbine and get killed by them. People pointed to statistics. So in the year 2008, when the Eye of the Wind was being developed, they found that approximately 75,000 to 275,000 birds were killed by turbines in the United States. They also found that annually per turbine, 0 to 70 bats were killed as well. In response to this criticism, Grouse Mountain's spokesperson had this to say: "It is a fact that birds and bats can be harmed if they fly close to the turbine. How do we justify the loss of wildlife to create our own electricity? The bottom line is that if we don't take real action to embrace alternative energy, then the results of unchecked climate change will be far more detrimental to wildlife than any single turbine can ever be." This wind power, of course, being a clean alternative to hydroelectric power. People wrote into local newspapers about multiple things. For example, the view impact it would have, the inefficiency of wind power as opposed to hydroelectric, and also just questioning the actual sustainability of this specific location for a wind turbine. One of these letters, by William B. Davis, aged like fine wine in my opinion. He writes, "Given that it will attract even more attention to the resort, you have to question the motives behind its installation." Jon Petrie, a longtime contrarian columnist for the province, wrote about the turbine, and I'll give you a little taste of his work and his style before I show you that article. Anyways, where was I? Jon Petrie does not believe in climate change, so it was no surprise when he dropped this bombshell.
"Let's end this rubbish over global warming. Political profs are brainwashing kids around the world."
Most of this article was outrageous at best, but I was shocked when I found myself agreeing with my worst enemy's take on the Grouse wind turbine. He said, "It'll be a privately owned wind turbine, which will be a bold statement. But I strongly suspect it'll be a statement about its value as a tourist attraction rather than as a generator of electricity." Jon was absolutely right. The following week, Grouse President McLaughlin responded in the paper. "Our collective arrogance that we should be entitled to consume the Earth's final barrel of oil today is not the real issue to be addressed. Our project will save thousands of barrels of the liquid gold and may inspire children to think a little differently than their parents have." There was also quite a back and forth between BC Hydro and Grouse Mountain on hooking up the wind turbine to the power grid. Grouse built their wind turbine and said, "Okay, we're done." And Hydro said, "Nuh-uh, you need our approval to connect it to our system." "Okay," said Grouse, "we're still done." Hydro said that Grouse needed to meet their requirements for the safety of their workers and their equipment before the turbine could connect. But Grouse said their engineers had already approved the safety system. They were mad because Hydro said, "No, your system is not the standard one, you've got to build the standard one." And Grouse had built a different one, which was a lot cheaper. Grouse spokesperson Chris Dagenet criticized Hydro's one-size-fits-all approach. "We don't like your one-size-fits-all approach." They remained at an impasse. The end. I think this situation was absurd. I don't understand how you start construction on a $1.4 million power project when you haven't consulted the provincial power corporation whom you're trying to connect to afterwards. I don't get it. Long story short, Grouse installed the equipment that they were required to install, and this turbine was connected to the power grid in September 2010, just about 7 months after the Winter Games had finished. BC Hydro CEO Dave Cobb congratulated Grouse Mountain on the completion of the project, highlighting their goals of self-sufficiency and sustainability. The more I read, the more I began to question the actual motivations behind this wind turbine, and the more skeptical I became of Grouse Mountain's environmental goals. I already mentioned how, while speaking to the district council, the president of Grouse Mountain announced that this wind turbine would produce 25% of the mountain's power in its long-term goal of energy self-sufficiency as well as carbon neutrality. What I didn't mention is that these goals of self-sufficiency and carbon neutrality were for 2020. Absolutely none of these things have happened. Let's play a guessing game. Does the turbine produce 25% of Grouse Mountain's power? No. Does it produce 20% of Grouse Mountain's power? No. Does it produce 10% of Grouse Mountain's power? No. Does it produce 5%? No! It produces up to 2% of the resort's power consumption. Yeah, you heard that right. Up to. What was supposed to provide enough electricity for 400 homes has been estimated to only produce enough for 12. Yes, that is 3% of the intended operating capacity. Obviously, Grouse hasn't increased their energy consumption by 12.5 times since 2010, with the windmill working at full capacity this whole time. That would make no sense at all. So it has to just be the wind turbine not being used to its full potential, or not being able to produce its full potential.
Inside the Eye of the Wind's viewing deck, there are two computer screens which display statistics. These are things like the outside temperature, the outside wind speed, the time, the angle the turbine is pointed at, but more interestingly, these screens display the amount of power the eye has generated today, this week, and all time. Now I have scoured the internet and found all of the images I could of these screens, so let's make a timeline here. On March 7th, 2010, it was not connected to the grid, but there is an early image of the screen showing 3,473 kilowatt hours. Skipping forward to after it was energized, the first timestamp I found was February 19th the following year, where it had generated 13,721 kilowatt hours. One more year, June 26th, 2012, 216,863 kilowatt hours. One more year again, July 9th, 2013, 363,121 kilowatt hours. So this probably doesn't mean much to you, and hell, it doesn't mean much to me either, but it begs the question, has the Eye of the Wind lived up to the hype? We all know what they promised it would produce, and we know that up until July 9th, 2013, what it actually produced. So let's compare them, shall we? So this is how much the Eye generated. Here's what the Eye generated in comparison to the advertised amount of 400 homes which Grouse Mountain presented to the district. 400 average Canadian homes consume 4.4 million kilowatt hours per year. Grouse Mountain, by either not running the turbine or there being not enough wind in the location they chose to construct the turbine, only generated 3% of the marketed clean energy. The up to 2% statistic on their website makes more and more sense.
The view pod that we're about to step into was built by a company called Sigma.
And we're back. Interestingly, by never running the Eye of the Wind, Grouse Mountain has actually successfully mitigated the negative effects of a wind turbine on the environment. Now, this is what we call innovation. But while I was up there, I spoke to a couple staff, and they told me that at the moment the elevator is broken in the Eye of the Wind, and so they can't actually even have visitors go up.
Hello, thank you for calling Grouse Mountain. How may I help you?
Oh hey, I was just wondering about the Eye of the Wind. I was wondering why it's closed.
So I'm going to be very honest with you. Since I started at Grouse, the Eye of the Wind was already closed.
Oh, really?
I believe it's just technical issues, and that's the main reason why it never operated.
Oh, okay. So, like, it's probably not going to open again soon, you reckon?
No, it hasn't been open since at least a year now. It's not operating, like, no one goes inside, we do not make tours of it, we don't really sell it.
So it's neither generating electricity nor ticket sales. Let me just say that I worked at Grouse Mountain for a couple years, and they were a totally sound employer. I actually met some of my lifelong friends there, and I hope to one day, if I have children, get them to work up there too, and definitely not just to take their 40% staff discount. I was reading some newspapers from 2009, 2008 during the development process of the Eye of the Wind, and I found something. An interview with the former president of Grouse Mountain, which I believe reveals some of the true motivations behind the Eye of the Wind. He was being interviewed in a promotional piece for the Eye of the Wind called The Vision, and he was asked where the original concept for the Eye of the Wind began.
Well, I was very fortunate growing up with a father who had big dreams. He first came to Grouse Mountain in 1972, and he started forming an idea in his mind that led us to where we are today, with our wind turbine. His idea was that people like to go to high places, so how could you take people to an even higher place once you get on top of a mountain? So his plan was to build a tethered balloon that would take people 1,000 feet further up in the sky to give them a view and an experience that would be unmatched. That dream never came to fruition in a balloon form, but the principle of it resonated in my mind when we looked at the possibility of putting a wind turbine on the summit of Grouse Mountain.
Now look, I might be putting on my tinfoil hat right now, but I believe this is what it was always about. All of this noise about environmentalism and sustainability in order to get approval for a cash cow tourist attraction. Grouse Mountain draws 1.3 million international visitors per year, and if just 5% of these guests buy a ticket to go up to the viewing pod of the Eye of the Wind, they make roughly $1 million back per year just for that. This would make it probably the most profitable 1.5 megawatt turbine in the world. While Grouse funded the construction and maintenance of this project privately, it still leaves a bad taste in my mouth how we were sold these grand environmental ideals only to end up with what is essentially a Q-tip on the peak of Vancouver. If Grouse Mountain had accurately included in its report to the District Council the facts that the turbine was positioned in a place where the wind was suboptimal for it to be spinning all the time, it would be an attraction first and an electricity generation method second, and then it would often have the blades locked off altogether, not generating electricity in order to be a better tourist attraction, it's highly likely that the District Council would not have approved this project. It feels like a very opportunistic move, using the Olympics and Vancouver's push to be as green as possible for those Olympics, to get this tourist attraction, what is essentially a theme park ride, built in one of the most NIMBY yet eco-presenting communities in the country. It would be like building a 65-meter tall Daryl's Deal statue where he's holding a sign made of solar panels. Greenwashing is everywhere, and Vancouver offers a prime example. I mean, if most locals don't even know what's happening, then you gotta say it's been a success.
Ultimately, the most sustainable thing about the Eye of the Wind might have been the revenue from the entry fees it generated.
They paved on the peak, but it never seemed to spin. A windmill high with a viewing deck built in. Don't it always disappoint that a corporation lied to make dough? They paved paradise and put up a wind turbine. They said 25%, but it turned out it's up to 2%. And they charge people $25 just to see the view. Don't it always feel a shame when a promise just don't work out the same? You pave on the peak and put up a viewing deck.